All right, everybody. So we are on, oops, not that slide, we're on that one. So we're on section 4.8, defining devolutionary factors. And so we've talked a lot about devolution so far, and so this is just a little bit furtherance of it. And so, you know, we won't have to go over the definition a whole lot, but some of the individual characteristics of devolution and how those might affect outcomes. So here's a couple of things we'll be getting to know. So the essential knowledge here. So again, make sure you know these as vocabulary words. So we're going to look at the division of groups by physical geography. So how devolution can evolve through physical geography, through ethnic separatism, ethnic cleansing, terrorism, economic and social problems, and then this word called irredentism. We'll have a little video on that. So uh, when you look at all of these factors combined together, you do end up with, if you get the more of these factors you have, the more likely it is that devolution will occur. And if you have all of these factors, you might have a serious problem with the country itself getting to balkanization. So, but these factors have really defined what the political geography map looks like today, and movements within countries and how those movements might affect the makeup of those countries is going to be relevant to us today. So again, let's just start off with this. So the definition of devolution, and again, this is our, I think, third video that's had this definition in it. And so at this point, you should be pretty familiar with it. So it is the breaking up of a state uh, into a smaller unit or the passing of power from the central government to the lower government. You might see the term a subnational government. Okay. And so anything like that. The lower governments gain increased levels of autonomy. And so that's the important part. So again, remember, devolution, the country's still together, but the smaller units have more power, which has been given to them by the bigger units. So we'll talk about why the national government might give that power away in just a bit. So again, as we've talked about, examples are important. And we have looked at Catalonia and the Basque region already. Definitely know those. We've definitely looked at Yugoslavia and the Balkan states there. Quebec, I don't think we've talked a lot about Quebec. I'll put that in another video, but Quebec they've tried to gain more autonomy throughout the last 40 or 50 years, something like that. And it's kind of wavered back and forth. They've had votes on it. And so right now that movement seems to be a little more subtle. It hadn't been in the past, but so anyway, and then none of it, we talked about them. They have gained more autonomy, but we haven't talked about Belgium. We haven't talked about Nigeria. So this is Belgium over here, and this is, it's a relatively diverse group for its size. And so the things that I want to point out here, it's not that, is this. So we have this dividing line. So we have really two primary languages being spoken in Belgium. And the top part here, because we've talked about how language can divide a culture. And so the top part here, they speak Dutch, and the bottom part here, they speak French. All right. And so uh, then this part, so the country's kind of divided into three parts. So we've got the top part, the lower part, and then Brussels, which is right here. And so they have like three main governing groups. And then there's a lot of separate groups. It's really rather confusing. But so up here in the Dutch part of it, this is Flemish. All right, so we're kind of looking here, Flemish speaking groups, and then Walloons is down here, and so each group has relative autonomy, and so again the country's kind of broken up even more, and we can see over here even in the this is the German speaking part of it, and so then we have uh, different groups within different parts. So there's yellow and the pink. So anyway, so Belgium is definitely an example of devolution. There's it's not a unitary government by any stretch. It is a federalism. And remember, with federalism, we've got federalism, the federal government up here, and then we have the state units down here. And for a long time, and still partly to a degree, the federal government in Belgium has not existed very well because you have a lot of different factions. There's like 12 political parties or something like that, and you need a majority to control. And so those 12 political parties have not gotten together, and so they've been without, a strong federal government for quite a while. Most recently, they gave the sitting active prime minister some extra powers because of COVID. But I think I read something today or yesterday that talked about Belgium having the highest per capita case of the virus, and that could be because for European countries, that could be because of the lack of leadership at a federal level. But anyway, so that's the idea of Belgium, and also Nigeria. I'm going to watch this little quick video on Nigeria here. They've had some civil wars, and they have groups that they devolved a lot. It used to just be a couple of different regions, and now it's a fair number. So uh, you know, again, examples are important, and so I don't want these to surprise you on the test. Let's watch this. I think it's a couple of minutes. We'll just watch this little window here.
It's been 50 years since the start of the Nigerian Civil War. It's also known as the Biafra War. It was one of the bloodiest and most divisive conflicts in post-independent Africa. Yet so many years later, some of the issues that set it off continue to make the headlines. In 1960, Britain, the colonial power, granted independence to Nigeria, a diverse country with hundreds of ethnic groups. But at the time, Nigeria was dominated by the Hausa people in the northern region, the Yorubas in the western region, and the Igbos in the eastern region. But it wasn't long before this new nation, Nigeria, was plunged into political and ethnic turmoil. This involved two military takeovers in 1966. And soon, these tensions led to the killings of thousands of minority Igbos living in northern Nigeria. So in the southeast, a military officer called Emeka Ojukwu declared the independence of the Republic of Biafra on behalf of the Igbo people. But Nigeria would not accept this, and on the 6th of July 1967, civil war broke out. And it raged on for the next 2.5 years. It's estimated that more than 1 million people died, most of them from hunger. In 1968, images of the famine were streamed worldwide. Biafran leaders used these pictures to gain sympathy for their cause. Around the world, protesters and celebrities campaigned for an end to the conflict. Back on the battlefield, the Nigerians were stronger and better equipped, and in January 1970, the Biafran secessionists surrendered. The war might have ended, but the idea of Biafra didn't. In Nigeria, some believe the underlying ethnic grievances have not been fully confronted or resolved. A new generation of pro-Biafra separatists has reignited the cause, and they hold marches and protests regularly in Nigeria and abroad. Arguably the most prominent group is the Indigenous People of Biafra, or IPOB. Its founder, the British Nigerian activist Nnamdi Kanu, was arrested for his rhetoric in 2015, but his detention has only boosted his popularity.
I've said before, and allow me to repeat, Biafra or death. One of the two must happen.
The establishment is still opposed to the idea of Biafra. The human rights group Amnesty International claims that in May last year, the Nigerian army killed 150 unarmed people during IPOB rallies. The army and police strongly denied this. So, is a Biafran breakaway likely or even plausible? Will there be renewed tension or perhaps a referendum? It's a sensitive topic, but as Nigerians look back, they'll be keen to avoid a repeat of the dark history their people suffered.
Alrighty, so just want to make sure that you're aware that was going on. When we talk about all these different examples of devolution, Nigeria has popped up as well, and we'll get more into that with some other video at some point. But again, the examples are important. Alrighty, so when we look at, so we want to look at, if we go back here, remember, we're going to start looking at all these. So factors that can lead to devolution of states. All right. So divisions of groups by physical geography. So we know that Spain, this is Spain, and the Basque region is up in here. And so there are mountains right here, and that helps create a barrier for the Basque people. Remember, they would like a lot more autonomy than they have. And remember, the Catalonia is up in this area as well. So, so it does occur. So division of groups by physical geography occurs in geographically large states where groups are isolated. And so if you have a large state, you might have one group that may be like, look, we don't feel as connected to the state as other people, and so we want more independence to be able to do things by ourselves. And this could be, there could be physical separation based on islands or mountains or things like that. Think about it like this. So here we have the west coast of the United States. Here's Hawaii down here. Here's Alaska up here. And so, is it possible? I'm not saying that this is happening by any stretch, but is it possible to think that Hawaii might feel more desire to separate or feel more isolated uh, with the U.S. than say Arizona, which is here or right around in here. All right. And it's because of that physical distance. You got this huge ocean in between us. Same thing with Alaska. If you're living here in Alaska, you are pretty far away from the mainland of the United States. And so the, it, the likelihood that something could happen to where these two might want more autonomy, you can kind of reasonably play that out in your head. Now, that's not the case in any significant way right now, but you get the idea that geography can make that happen. All right. So the distance between the capital and the core areas. And so again, and this is more so before technology, but if you had the U.S. Capitol over there, and Arizona sitting over here, that's going to be that might cause some problems. If you're far away from your capital city, you're going to feel more disconnected and want to make more of your own decisions, and so that's certainly likely. All right. We could have barriers to infrastructure, communication, or connectivity. So if we have things like a lack of roads, lack of railroads, ports, airports, the internet, and so if there's a lack of communication infrastructure, that can cause this splitting. And so remember, what we're really talking about is what are things that would cause people to want to disassociate from the main government and do more of their own thing. Okay, and so it's some type of disconnect, whether it's physical disconnect, like roads and things like that, or technological disconnect, whatever it is, that's kind of what we're going for. You could have regional differences in natural resources. You might have one area that, let's say that this area up here, and I'm just making stuff up at this point. Let's say that this area up here was very rich in resources, lots of cash up there, and let's say that this one was very poor in resources. This country up here may say, look, we don't want all of our money going down into here, and so that's kind of the idea. So if you have differences in natural resources within a certain country, that could cause it. Or this country might be like, look, we don't like that they're keeping all this money, whatever it is. All right. In larger countries, some smaller areas may want autonomy or separation. We've kind of talked about that already. And remember, we have this effect called distance decay, and that is the farther you get away from the source of something, the less effect it has on it. And so, again, if we're talking about the capital here in the U.S., and the effect, the distance decay, we don't see as big of an effect out in Arizona, especially not in Alaska, especially not in Hawaii, things like that. And so, the farther we get, the farther you get away from the center of things, the more likely it is that you might be like, you know what, I'd like to kind of do my own thing. Alrighty. And so the Basque region, again, we've talked about that before, would be an example. All right. We also have this thing called ethnic separatism. So this is just another vocab word. When there are many ethnic groups in a country, and so we talked about Yugoslavia as one of the big examples. And one ethnic groups want more political power, especially if there's a history of self-rule. So these groups may stay more culturally unique. And so if you have, so let's look at this. This is the state of Georgia, not Georgia, but the state of Georgia over by Russia, the country. And so we have two different areas. South Ossetia, they are their own ethnic group, and then we have Abkhazia, which is here, and these groups have broken away from Georgia. Now, there's some questions right now. The international community still recognizes South Ossetia as part of Georgia. Russia, however, has come in because this part used to be, heavy Russian influence. Russia has recognized South Ossetia as its own country, as well as Abkhazia. So those are just some examples of ethnic separatism. And so, again, we saw, Yugoslavia was the big example we keep coming back to, but there are definitely other parts of the world. So here's where this is, where Georgia is. Okay, there's Italy, and so it's in Europe. Alrighty, so that's ethnic separatism. We also have ethnic cleansing. And this is deliberate removal or killing of a particular ethnic group by the government. And so we watched, Hotel Rwanda, and so that was definitely an example of ethnic cleansing. And if it's not the removal but the killing, remember we call that genocide. And so let's just watch this quick video. And again, Yugoslavia, they did have that in Serbia. Some ethnic cleansing, the Holocaust, everybody's familiar with that from World War II, Hitler killing Jewish people. Rwanda genocide, the Rohingya, we've talked about them a little bit earlier. That's over in China. So let's take a look at this real quick. Nothing too harsh in the video, but it is a heavy topic for sure.
Over a year has passed since Myanmar security forces launched a brutal offensive against the country's ethnic and religious minority group, the Rohingya people. Since then,
I'm sorry, I just said China with Rohingya. Brain lapse there, my bad.
Human rights groups and world leaders condemn the violence as an act of
ethnic cleansing.
It's been characterized by many as ethnic cleansing.
A textbook example of ethnic cleansing.
It's a phrase that's been used to describe some of the worst atrocities throughout history. So why isn't it illegal according to international law? First, ethnic cleansing largely refers to the expulsion of an ethnic or religious group of people from an area of land. But legally, a clear definition does not exist. Because of this lack of legal definition by the United Nations, ethnic cleansing is technically not considered a crime under international law. The first time the term was used on the world stage was during the conflict in the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s. The United Nations Commission of Experts was tasked with investigating if violations of international humanitarian law was committed there. On May 24, 1994, that commission released its findings where it described ethnic cleansing as, quote, a purposeful policy designed by one ethnic or religious group to remove by violent and terror-inspiring means the civilian population of another ethnic or religious group from certain geographic areas. Following the report's release, media and scholars began using the term for incidents of systematic and violent removal of an undesired ethnic or religious group from a given territory. And despite the Commission's description of the term and public use of the phrase, the United Nations General Assembly never officially defined it, nor made it an international crime. That's because it concluded that acts of ethnic cleansing can often fall within specific war crimes or genocide. Although the line between genocide and ethnic cleansing often become blurred, they aren't exactly the same thing. It all comes down to intent. Here's the difference. Genocide is recognized as a crime under international law since 1948. The Convention of the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide defines certain acts of violence against national, ethnic, racial, or religious groups with the intent to destroy that group would be classified as genocide. While the act of ethnic cleansing, according to scholars, is more about geography and the removal of specific groups of people from particular areas of land. To put it simply, genocide is an intentional act meant to eliminate a group of people, when ethnic cleansing is more broadly about removing them. So genocide can be an act of ethnic cleansing, but not every act of ethnic cleansing is considered genocide. As the world continues to see acts of ethnic cleansing unfold over and over, is it time that the international community come together to legally define it and make it an international crime? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching Now This World.
Alrighty, so a distinction between genocide and ethnic cleansing, but generally
over a year
same
has passed since me.
Oh, there we go. This was not a video. This is a screenshot I got, but you can see this is why I had China on my brain. So this is from a few days ago. State Department says China committing genocide against Muslim minorities. So this is something that is happening today. All right. Obviously, terrorism is another thing that can cause devolutionary processes within a country. And so just as a definition, terrorism is violence organized by a group that is aimed at civilians. Okay, that's the big difference. One of the key things, terrorism is aimed at civilians to incite terror for political reasons. And so, when you look at 9/11 in the United States, those attacks were aimed at civilians for political reasons. All right. If a state government, so here's the devolutionary part of this. If a state government can't stop terrorism from happening, you might see devolutionary pressures increasing. And so you can see over here, this is like a terrorism index kind of thing, the number of terrorist actions in different countries. And so just kind of leave it at that. Here's a global terrorism index. So if we have gray, that's not included, so that doesn't count. The light blue, I guess we'd call it, means that there's no impact of terrorism. And then as you get to the dark red, that would be the biggest impact. And so if you were looking at these countries, the ones like this that are up in this area, the in between orange and red and then dark red, these might be the countries where you might expect to see devolutionary forces taking more hold. Obviously over here, with India and Pakistan, but there are other states out there that have this problem. So it's the ability of a government to take care of those terrorist activities that helps alleviate or minimize the pressure on devolutionary forces. All right. So now we also have social problems and economic problems that lead to devolution. So these are just things to kind of keep in the back of your head. When you see a test that says name one social problem that might lead to it. So when we talk about social problems, if the government abuses its power towards one group, so think about the civil rights movement in the U.S. or just slavery in the U.S. Or any minority group not getting the rights or being denied rights by the government, that could definitely lead to devolutionary pressures. Also, things like differences in language, religion, history, ethnicity, all those things can lead to devolutionary pressures. Some other social problems, access to healthcare, that could do it. Denial of minority rights, environmental justice, religious conflict. So again, these are just some of those social problems that when there is conflict, it can cause one group to say, you know what, I think we're done with this. We want more rule for ourselves. We want to govern ourselves instead of being part of this other system. All right. We also have economic problems that can lead to devolution. And so this is, here's one of the big questions. Is the economic system that you have, does it leave anybody behind? Is there a high unemployment rate among certain groups? Is economic growth even or uneven throughout the country? Those would be questions that, if these are problems, that can definitely cause devolutionary pressures. Because when, if part of a country, let's say that the U.S. government kind of neglected the West Coast and said, you know what, you guys are on your own, that could lead to some resentment by the people on the West Coast and say, if you're not going to even bother to help us out, why should we even bother to be part of this country? And so that's kind of the idea. And take a look at this. Countries with primate cities, and we just mean like major cities, can have a highly developed city or capital while the rest of the country is relatively underdeveloped. And so you might have, in North Korea, the capital, name's not coming to my head right now, the North Korean capital is very developed, lots of tall buildings, things like that. The rest of the countryside, from everything that we see, is pretty poor, and so very different situation. But if you have a very wealthy city here, and then you don't have much wealth anywhere else, these people in all these other places, they may start to get resentful of all the wealth there. Alrighty. And so I also want to show you this map. This is what they call this is global income inequality. And so this is just measuring the gap in income between people. And so this thing called a Gini index, you'll get this in economics. It's just a way to measure how equal or unequal a society is in terms of income distribution. And so the paler yellow means that things are more equal, and the darker the color gets, that means things are less equal. And so if we're looking at states like that, or some darker ones, states like that. Then we get to some of the red. So Mexico's got a pretty high income inequality. The U.S. is kind of in the middle here, but wherever the income inequality is greatest, you might start to see some devolutionary pressures because people are like, look, I'm not getting my piece of the pie, so to speak, and they might think the system is kind of fixed against them. And then the last term that we have, then we'll watch a video and then be done, is this term called irredentism. And again, we're talking about factors that can influence devolutionary pressures. And so irredentism is when there's a movement by a nation to unite other parts of its nation that are spread over other borders. And so we've talked about Taiwan, we talked about Hong Kong. That would be kind of an example of irredentism. But China's desire to take over Taiwan is irredentism. and Russia and the Ukraine. We'll look at a video here in just a second about that. And so let's say that it was a former, let's say this is a country, and something happens, and this chunk of the country goes to this country now, and so now it's one country. If this country says, hey, we want that little slice back, that would be irredentism. Okay, and it's usually because the cultures are very similar, and we see this a lot with a lot of the Russian bordering states, because those people oftentimes identified as Russian, and then they became something else, and so now Russia's saying like, hey, we want you to be part of us again. All right, and so let's watch this video. This is on Russia and Ukraine, and again, you should probably watch this one. And by the way, here's where this is on the map. You can see a little inset there, because this is, one of the examples that you should know for irredentism. All right, and then after this video, we're done.
Я русская, а это значит, во мне мятежная душа. Я русская, а это значит, другой быть просто не могу. С праздником, Севастополь! Люблю тебя! Спасибо!
This is Crimea in early 2017, nearly 3 years after the Russian takeover.
It is the day of the founders of the fatherland. In other words, a very patriotic celebration, particularly for the people of Sevastopol who use this day to celebrate their pride in Russia.
Люди не понимают, что действительно происходит. Люди думают, что мы здесь в оккупации. Как мы можем находиться в оккупации, если мы сделали свой выбор за возвращение домой, в Россию?
Нам силу дает наша верность отчизне. И наши мысли, и наше будущее должны быть с Россией.
In a controversial referendum, over 95% of Crimeans voted to join Russia in 2014. Though the annexation and the referendum are not recognized internationally, many of the Crimeans we met were eager to obtain their Russian citizenship.
Что ты россиянин, еще подтверждают наши паспорта, что мы действительно стали россиянами настоящими.
A lot of Crimeans are hoping for a return to the peninsula's glory days, when it was known as a popular tourist destination for Soviet elites, vacationing along the Black Sea coast.
We're in the southern town of Alushta, which has seen a massive amount of development over the last 3 years. That's largely thanks to Mr. Alexander Lebedev.
Lebedev is a Russian billionaire with a combative reputation. He spotted an opportunity for an energetic tycoon like himself.
You're building a church, you're building a theatre, you're building a clinic, you're building hotels.
Yeah.
You own pretty much all of this then?
Yeah. This is an investment of about 200 million euro, dollar, it's whatever. And I've never picked up a penny of profit. I love the place and I treat it as a mission. I picked up a few missions in life. It's always better to put some butter.
Some butter? I'm sorry, I'm such an amateur. Why is it that Russia is so focused on developing Crimea?
Well, I have no doubt that Putin is very much interested to show results in Crimea. That's beyond any doubt.
But he has something to prove here.
Well, the whole Russian nation has something to prove here.
And what is that they need to prove?
That they'll be running the place much better than it was run by Ukraine. Ukraine neglected completely Crimea. And so what the Russians are doing, they're investing 10 times or 20 times more money into infrastructure, even putting back all of the tourists within such a short period of time.
The projected boom in tourism that Russia's support would bring excited a lot of local business owners. People like Oleg Zubkov, who runs a safari park.
Это как раз есть референдум и весна, те знаменитые тигры, которые родились в ночь, когда крымчане голосовали. Это была дань тем патриотическим чувствам, с которыми мы встретили переход Крыма в состав России. Изабелла, мы должны быть together, вместе. Together.
Are you sure?
Yes, закрой дверь.
Oh my God. I hear that you wanted these beasts to play a role in Crimea's return to Russia.
Да, это правда. Если бы эти львы вышли на внешние границы, то они воевали бы с украинскими националистами, которые, хотели нас, русских, побить, там, изничтожить. Иди ко мне, мой хороший. То ведь вы боитесь немножко львов? Также и бандеровцы, по моему убеждению, должны были испугаться львов.
But Zubkov's initial enthusiasm for a Russian Crimea soon turned to disillusionment when his business began to suffer.
How much is your business down by?
Но сегодня осталось от того объема, который был в украинском Крыму, 1/3, и она продолжает уменьшаться.
Why do you think that is that tourist numbers are down?
Ну, во-первых, мы полностью лишились украинского потока. Сегодня всего этого нет. Крым находится в изоляции и находится под достаточно жесткими санкциями.
More worrying than the dip in tourists, though, is the fact that Crimea is running dry. In large part because in 2014, Ukraine dammed the North Crimean Canal, which previously provided 85% of the peninsula's fresh water.
Это было огромное водохранилище. Сегодня воды от прошлого водохранилища осталась маленькая лужа. Вот. И этой воды нам не хватит и на 1 месяц. Я думаю, что будут страдать очень многие и жители городов, если проблему правительство не решит за счет других водохранилищ.
But the Kremlin says it has a solution to the water problem, the tourist problem, and just about every other problem in the peninsula. The Kerch Bridge. We visited while construction was still ongoing.
We're standing on the biggest bridge in Russian history. It's going to be 12 miles long. It stretches all the way from Russian mainland, which is just over there, to Crimea.
President Putin triumphantly opened the mega project earlier this year.
Это замечательный результат, который делает Крым и легендарный Севастополь еще сильнее, а всех нас еще ближе друг к другу.
Now that Russia has further cemented its grip on Crimea, both physically and symbolically, we traveled to Ukraine's capital, Kiev, to meet the people still pushing for reunification.
People out here to celebrate.
Ukraine! Ukraine!
This is a very nationalistic crowd. There's a lot of far-right militias who are coming here to make their voices heard. What are you guys doing here today?
Дуже велика дата для усіх українських націоналістів. Люди прокидаються, вони повертаються до свого коріння українського. Цього року набагато більше юнаків.
Do you think that Ukraine can take Crimea back?
Неодмінно станеться, неодмінно.
The hangover of Crimea only emboldens these far-right militia groups, many of whom are actively fighting Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine, where a bloody conflict has claimed over 10,000 lives since 2014. But other Ukrainians have focused on curbing the Kremlin's soft power. Ukraine is currently home to over 1/3 of Russian Orthodox churches, which are often criticized for being vessels for Putin's propaganda. But in a historic decision, Orthodox leadership finally agreed to grant the Ukrainian church independence from Moscow.
What does this mean to Ukrainian people?
I believe that this moment shows our cultural identity. It helps to unite all Ukrainians in one nation.
How did the situation with the annexation of Crimea impact what's happening now?
Ukrainian people, they are usually quite patient, but step by step Russia showing her aggression and we have to fight back.
We've arrived here in Kiev at a very opportune moment because the president is about to make his first speech to Ukrainian people to talk about the declaration of independence of the Ukrainian church from the Russian Orthodox Church.
Слово має президент України Петро Порошенко.
Це велика перемога боголюбивого українського народу над московськими демонами. Ми за місяці ще більше переконалися, що помісна церква є одним із ключових елементів, запорукою незалежності нашої держави.
This is about more than religion. And while Ukrainian parishioners attended Sunday Mass, President Putin took the news as a major blow. The Kremlin immediately denounced the church's decision and even said it would defend Russian believers if threatened in Ukraine, sparking real fears of further violence.
The fear of escalating conflict rang true. Just this week, Russia shot at and seized 3 Ukrainian ships and 24 sailors who were in the shared waterway of the Kerch Strait. Moscow has maintained a geostrategic naval base on the peninsula for decades, allowing them to reach Eastern Europe, the Mediterranean, and Syria. As part of an effort to monitor the militarization in the region, Ukraine established the Ministry of Temporarily Occupied Territories and IDPs, headed by Vadim Chernysh.
So what can you tell us about any military developments that you've seen
You
on
can
the
see here 3
peninsula?
doors, for example. There are places where S-400 triumph complex established by Russians.
So from your satellite images, you've picked up
Yes.
3 new missile bases here.
Right. They can reach a lot of countries, including Middle East. They use Crimea as a military base.
So essentially, this ministry was formed in order to try and take back what Ukraine sees as occupied territories, including Crimea. What actual work are you doing to achieve those goals?
We are trying to win hearts and minds of Ukrainians who live within occupied territories.
Isn't it a bit late for that? If most people are now happy with the fact that Russia has taken Crimea.
We have been trying to support our population because they are Ukrainian citizens. Russia influence a lot. They use their secret service, they use their propaganda, bribes. They demonstrate some success in infrastructure development, and they don't want to show problems in with human rights in Crimea.
Russia's abysmal human rights record has trickled down to Crimea, leading the US to announce additional sanctions in November 2018. Here in Kiev, the Crimean Human Rights Group works to collect testimonies and evidence of illegal detention and torture.
Александр, скажите, пожалуйста, какое время вы провели в СИЗО Симферополя? Сколько времени вы там были?
9 месяцев.
Alexander Kostenko was eventually moved to a prison and held for over 3 years in what he claims are baseless charges of assault and possession of illegal weapons.
Скажите, пожалуйста, какие пытки к вам применялись?
Сотрудники ФСБ хотели мне отрезать палец, поэтому с учетом того, что я сжал кулаки, мне была сломана рука. И вытащили меня наверх и повесили на дверь, застегнули и повесили на дверь.
За руки, то есть руки были в наручниках?
За руки наверх так повесили меня. И получается, так и говорю, проведем где-то около 6 часов.
The team here has documented dozens of cases like this one. The founder, Olga Skripnik, was also forced to flee her home in Crimea in 2014.
What kind of activities are these people involved in order to get picked up by the Russian authorities?
Більшість цих людей, вони були пов'язані з якимись активними формами громадянських активностей. Це, наприклад, журналісти або блогери, або це були активісти, які просто виступали проти окупації. Як, наприклад, Володимир Балух, він просто підняв український прапор на своєму домі в селі, і лише через це проти нього відкрили кримінальну справу.
Recently, have things got better or worse?
Порівняно, наприклад, з 2014 роком на 2018 рік кількість таких людей, хто незаконно позбавлений волі через їх погляди, зросла в 5 разів.
There's almost no reliable data on what's actually going on in Crimea, and Russia holds a tight grip over all information coming out. Recently, even traveling to the peninsula has become difficult. So we wanted to catch up with Oleg Zubkov, the zookeeper, to ask if things really have become worse.
Has there been any change in atmosphere there? I mean, now that the Russians have been there for 4 years?
Вот, Крым превращается в такое, знаете, полицейское государство, военизированное государство, где военных колонн, военных машин, Крым вооружается. Понятно, что мы готовимся к какой-то Третьей мировой войне, но это происходит очень активно.
Was all this worth it?
Вот я не против России, я русский человек, я очень люблю Россию. И я также для себя уверен, что лучше, если бы Крым остался бы тогда в составе Украины. Вот, но, к сожалению, я тогда не ценил, что мы имели.
That was awesome. Just realized I was on mute. We're all done with this one. 4.9 is next. There's 10 altogether, so we got 2 more of these. And so anyway, y'all take care. See you on the next one.